Dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. The headlights on both ends of my heat day. This country life is for me. Ride with us, HPJ. Ride with us, HPJ.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Nemechek, and I'm a livestock marketing consultant for High Plains Journal. I'll be your moderator this morning for High Plains Journal's first ever virtual Cattle U. High Plains Journal has been a weekly fixture in your mailboxes since 1949. We grew up right alongside the cattle industry in this state over the past 70 years. Our award-winning editorial staff has reported on every segment of the cattle industry, from the cow-calf operations in Flint Hills to the stocker cattlemen of Oklahoma, to the feeders from Nebraska to Texas, and every place in between. Last year was our first Cattle U, our attempt to bring education to all segments of the beef industry. Like all of you, we wish we could conduct our Cattle U in person this year, but safety has to come first. And so we and our very gracious and flexible speakers and sponsors have pivoted to this virtual platform. Before we get started, we wanted to invite you to stand where you are and join us in welcoming Kansas State FFA officers, Vice President Abby Johnson, President Elizabeth Sturgis, and Treasurer Hattie Polson as they lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, ladies, for that awesome start to our day. High Plains Journal is a proud supporter of FFA and 4-H youth across our coverage area. The last spring, we ran a promotion donating 25% of every subscription we sold to FFA chapters of our subscribers' choosing. We were able to donate more than $23,500 from subscribers' generosity. And most importantly, we created opportunities for the next generation of agricultural entrepreneurs. I'm sure many of you have had some experience with Zoom webinar platform over the last 7 months. But for those of you who may be unfamiliar with how this will work, let me share some notes. First, we will have already muted your video and microphones. If you have questions, and that's exactly what we want to hear, we want you to click on the chat box below and type your questions in the pop-up box that appears to the side of your screen. We've built in plenty of time to ask questions during the webinar. All of our sessions will be recorded, and the recordings will be posted soon after we're done on www.cattleu.net. The schedule of sessions and speakers is posted there as well. And if you miss a session live, remember, you can always catch up with the recordings later at your convenience. We want to thank our lead sponsor for this session, Alta Seeds. Here's their message.
Advanta and Alta Seeds are proud to be sponsors of High Plains Journal Cattle U, and we're glad that you could join us today and be a part of that. Remember that Alta Seeds and Advanta are the industry-leading forage sorghum providers, and in that this year we're launching our new brand, Empire. Empire Premier Forages bring together industry-leading traits. BMR6 for high fiber digestibility, Brachitic Dwarf for great leaf-to-stem ratio and great standability, Dry Stock for harvesting quicker, photoperiod sensitive for an extended out harvest window, and APHIX designation for sugarcane aphid tolerance. To hear more about our Empire forages, our premier forages, join us on November the 5th for our Sorghum Frontiers virtual field day, where you can learn more about how to take your forages to the next level.
Thanks to all of our great sponsors like Alta Seeds for helping us put on our virtual Cattle U. You'll be able to find more information about them and the services and products that they have to offer in your registration packet that were emailed to you this week. You can find more information online at www.cattleu.net. And now it's time to get started with our speaker, Ty Lawrence. Dr. Ty Lawrence is a professor of animal science at West Texas A&M University. Before his time in academia, Dr. Lawrence spent 2 years with Smithfield in the position of research manager for pork harvesting and processing facilities on the Eastern Seaboard. In his current position at West Texas A&M University, he teaches 13 different animal, food, and meat science courses and is the director of the West Texas A&M Beef Carcass Research Center, which annually evaluates 200,000 plus cattle for a variety of research projects. Dr. Lawrence, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you're in a warm and dry place right now. On my way in this morning, I took a few jokes and comments that you could chill beef outside, and that's definitely true. In Canyon right now, it's a brisk 37 degrees, and the wind chill is at 27. So to get us started, let's discuss Beef Grading 101 today, and hopefully we'll have a good learning session. So as I was mentioning briefly, the different important carcass characteristics that we evaluate whenever we send an animal to harvest are shown here in this slide. At the top, we observe a difference in carcass size, and we evaluate that as a difference in weight. In the middle, we notice that those are different marbling scores. Those 6 images happen to be the only 6 official images of the 9 different marbling levels that we observe in the USDA quality grading system. And then on the bottom, those 5 images represent our USDA yield grading system, which evaluates the cutability of an animal. So I like to teach students that the quality grade is effectively an indicator of how good the carcass is, whereas the yield grade is an indicator of how much we're going to be able to put into the box as a percentage of the original carcass weight. If I break our grading system down into its 2 primary components, we have quality and then yield again. The quality system is paramount on an improvement in the finished outcome of an animal. The pinnacle of that is what we call prime, the highest quality grade, then followed by choice, select, and standard. On the other side of our system, we have commercial utility and cutter canner. And what I mean by the other side is commercial utility and cutter canner are reserved for animals that are older in age, and we typically reserve those for the cull animal, typically a cull cow. And then you see again yield grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 1 being the premier highest yielding animal, 5 being the fattest, wastiest animal. One of the key components in our quality grading system since December of 2017 is the evaluation of animal age via dentition. Now, previous to this, animal age was only evaluated via skeletal maturity and lean maturity. The addition of the dentition system improved our homogeneity of the animal and reduced some of the subjectivity inherent in those skeletal and lean ossification systems. So what you're looking at now is 3 different stages of dental eruption. The animal on the left that shows all 8 baby teeth or 0 permanent incisors is an animal somewhere less than 24 months of age. In the middle, you see 2 teeth, 2 permanent teeth that are up and in wear, and the remaining 6 baby teeth. That indicates that animal's somewhere greater than 24 months, but yet less than 30 months of age. And on the right, you see 3 or more permanent incisors. This image actually shows 4 permanent incisors, so we consider that animal greater than 30, but less than 38 months of age. And the key component now is SRMs are being removed from the human food supply. That goes back to a rule that we implemented in January of 2004, and more recently implemented as part of our grading system in December of 2017. So that's now a new demarcation of quality versus what we've done in the past. Animals that are automatically of 2, 1, or 0 permanent teeth are eligible for Prime Choice Select Standard, whereas animals that are 3 or more permanent incisors go back to the traditional system of bone ossification and lean maturity evaluation. The primary determinant of quality grade is shown in this image now. We have our marbling scores. On the left, you see very high quality marbling indicative of slightly abundant, moderately abundant, and the abundant score. We categorize those cattle as prime. So I would like you to think of a white tablecloth restaurant, a very high-end product, and actually not a product that commonly stays in the Midwest where most of our viewers and readers probably are today. These products typically go out to the ends of our communities and are mostly sold in our higher end communities. So think of New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, Dallas, Miami. Those type of markets typically utilize most of the prime product. And right now, as a country, we're just under 10% prime is in a daily harvest and grade. In the middle, you notice premium, choice, and choice. About 73% of our daily mix. About 30% of that is premium choice. A little over 40% of that is commodity choice or low choice. And so the premium choice market has traditionally been a middle tier restaurant quality beef. Think something like an Outback restaurant. Whereas low choice beef has traditionally been daily restaurant beef, but we're seeing a greater and greater proportion of choice beef now reaching our supermarket shelves. Our select product, you notice a lower marbling evaluation in that image, now at a 14.25%. Select was traditionally supermarket beef, and that is still where you can find it, as well as some lower price point restaurants. And then at the very right, you see no roll. No roll is a little bit of a misnomer, and it indicates that the beef product was not graded. That's an industry terminology for no roll. And you see just under 3% of our beef supply is now considered no roll. Now I kind of humorously but somewhat truthfully tell students that no roll beef is served to prisoners and school children. The point being, no roll beef is traditionally lower price point, and it's sold to institutions that are seeking a lower price point option. So the quality grade is predominantly based on marbling scores as shown in these images. The second part of that that we still have in our system, but it has been largely replaced by dentition, is our maturity in as much as bone ossification. And what I would like you to focus on are the images at the bottom. The bone ossification is evaluated by the cartilaginous tips that are at the ends of the spinous processes. And as an animal increases in its bone ossification, we go from a subtle white cartilaginous tip to one that is slightly ossified in this B maturity category, to one that is more ossified in the C maturity category. The D maturity is almost completely ossified, and then the E maturity category is one that has no cartilage left and is completely ossified in all cartilaginous tips. So those images there really illustrate the progression of ossification change that we observe in the carcasses as they increase in physiological maturity. The second part of that original maturity system is a lean maturity score. And these images shown now illustrate the change from very young on the left to very old on the right. The effect that is being observed here is an increase in the concentration of myoglobin that is in the muscle tissue. If I had an image to the far left of the A20, you would notice that that image is very light pink in color, similar to what you see in veal. Veal calves, if you've ever had a veal chop, are very light pink in color, and you would agree that that's similar to the color of pork. Whereas on the far right, the E100 is representative of a cull cow that might be 12, 14, 16 years of age. So the effect that you're observing is an increasing concentration of myoglobin, which occurs as an animal ages. If I bring all of that together, then I can assign a maturity score, A through E, and a marbling score, abundant through practically devoid. And you see that we have our quality grade outcomes, prime through cutter. Now in reality, when this chart was created, there were 4,500 options in here, given that within each maturity score and each marbling score, there are 10 degrees of maturity and 10 degrees of marbling that are an option. So it can get quite complicated if you're trying to find an exact quality grade based on an individual maturity and marbling score. Transitioning now into yield grading. So we talked about quality grading, which was how good is the carcass. Now yield grading is how much am I going to be able to get into a box based on that carcass weight. And I've highlighted for you the single most important outcome, which is back fat thickness. That's a linear measure of back fat observed on the animal between the 12th and 13th ribs. Second to that is the relationship between the ribeye area and the hot carcass weight. And then finally is an estimation of the percentage trim fat in the kidney channel, pelvic channel, and the heart fat. The numbers shown at the bottom, 4.1% for yield grade 1, 32% for yield grade 2, and so on and so forth, are where we're grading right now as a country. So you can see that most of the cattle are actually yield grade 3s. In fact, just under half, whereas 12% are yield grade 4s and only a slight tail, 2.3%, are yield grade 5s. In practice, this can be done a number of ways. To be the most exact, you can take a ruler and measure the back fat with a ruler to determine the exact back fat thickness. This is something that our new camera technology can do in an instant, and a grader can estimate with very good precision as well. The second piece of that is the assessment of the cross-section ribeye area. So you can see this image illustrates how this is done with an original USDA dot grid. You're counting dots on the ribeye, and each one of those dots represents 1/10 of a square inch. Again, that can be done very accurately with the dot grid. The camera can do it with extreme precision, and a grader can do it with very good precision as well after years of training. And the last piece of this is our estimate of kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. This is probably, without much argument, the most subjective portion of our yield grade, because we're guesstimating the percentage of the carcass weight that is contained within the kidney area, the pelvic channel, and the heart fat. We know from data that beef type cattle tend to have about 2.5 to 3% kidney fat if we cut it out and weigh it, whereas dairy type cattle have much greater percentage kidney, pelvic, and heart fat, approaching 6, 7, 8% on an average basis. And I've got two images here that really illustrate what the yield grade is evaluating for us. You see a black-nosed Charolais steer in the lower left corner, and then multiple slices of that same steer taken after harvest. And you'll notice that this steer, although it's a yield grade 2, is quite trim throughout its round area, throughout the porterhouse area, throughout the ribeye area, when there's a decent amount of intermuscular or seam fat observed in the chuck slice. However, in the end, this steer was 66% lean, 18% fat, and 16% bone. At the other end of the spectrum, we have a yield grade 5 Angus steer. Notice much different in its cutability. This animal is quite wasty, and every slice, you notice an extreme amount of waste or trimmable fat. In fact, if you look at the pie chart in the lower right corner, this steer was 1% more fat than it was lean, at 44% fat and 43% lean. So we're trimming a tremendous amount of waste fat away from the carcass when we have a yield grade 5 outcome. So to take it further into grading, we want to discuss carcass discounts and then carcass premiums. The first carcass discount we'll observe is that one observed on the slaughter floor, and that's an animal that has 3 or more permanent incisors. And the average discount applied today is $17.08 per hundredweight, with quite a bit of variation from individual packer programs around that. The reason for this discount is because the SRMs that must be removed from the human food supply and the inability to market this animal widely to all outcome markets. So it's a hassle factor, if you will, because of the difference that this animal has to be treated rather than other animals. The next discount you'll notice here are carcass weight variation. So we have lightweight carcasses on the left side. Those less than 600 pounds are currently taking an average of, let's call it a $22 per hundredweight discount. The 600 to 900 pound range is par on all grids currently. 9 to 1050 receives a small discount of $4.34 per hundredweight. I do want to note that this is only a handful of packers and grids that are charging a discount in this range. Most have now gone to 0. And then the greater than 1050 discount appears to be at most facilities today, and we're averaging $16 per hundredweight. The common discount would be for the difference between the choice and select carcass, commonly known as the choice select spread. And yesterday that was at $15.54 per hundredweight, which is an indication that we have too much select product, and we need to get a few more choice cattle out there to reduce that select discount. Our USDA standard discount is at $27.47 right now, and that is shown by these 2 images here. I want everybody in our viewership to know that there are no official marbling cards for either traces or practically devoid. Both of these are my sincere opinion of what those look like, and so I show those just for that effect. The next discount is a yield grade 4 and 5. A yield grade 4 is $12.36 a discount, and yield grade 5 at $17.93 per hundredweight. And realize that when the ribeye leaves and or the carcass leaves the plant, fundamentally all of that fat minus about 1/8 to 1/4 inch has been trimmed away from the carcass to get it into suitable form before it goes into a box. So there's a tremendous amount of waste fat trim that is being removed from that carcass. Another important discount is our dairy discount. So we see here on the left is a dairy ribeye, and on the right, a beef type ribeye. And the reason for this discount is multiple fold, but one of the primary reasons is a less than desirable meat to bone ratio. The dairy carcass from which that ribeye was imaged on the left, on average, yields 3.1 pounds of meat for every pound of bone, whereas the beef type carcass on the right yields 4.1 pounds of meat for every pound of bone. And the current discount is just about $4 per hundredweight for the dairy type carcass. Hard bone animal, so think commercial, utility, and cutter canner carcasses. They receive a $32 hundredweight discount, and in the fed steer and heifer system, those typically come from heifers that were exposed to a bull and or heiferettes that had been bred and lost their calf, or late cut bulls. All of those animals had an excess of estrogen. Estrogen is the sole determinant that causes the ossification process, and that's the reason those animals are at risk. And many of you have probably heard of a dark cutter. The image on the left is the infamous dark cutter. That animal was stressed prior to death and depleted its glycogen reserves, thus causing the dark cutting outcome. A $32 per hundredweight discount because that carcass must be marketed in a different manner than our traditional beef carcasses. We see a stag here in this image now, so think extremely heavily muscled and absolutely devoid of marbling. So a stag discount is right at $31 per hundredweight. And imagine having a difficult time marketing that product to anybody. That is an extremely thin market for the beef processor to deal with, and it's as much of a hassle for them to do that as it was. And so they're putting a significant discount out that says, please do not bring us any more of those. So let's switch gears into carcass premiums real quick and wrap this up. The first premium that I want to mention is an all-natural premium. And all natural means a lot of different things to different people and different labels. I'm going to mention that the technical legal definition of an all natural brand is a product that contains no added ingredients and are minimally processed. Again, the devil is in the details on all natural programs, but the current premium averages $31.20. And so you really need to define what the program is and what the premium is for the target program, and do all of that before you consider getting into one of these. Next, you'll see a non-hormone treated cattle program, $21.63 for an NHTC animal. The most popular and widely known brand in our country is Oregon Natural Beef or Country Natural Beef. We've also pushed a lot of that beef to the European Union through our export partnership, and the Chipotle Mexican Grill is another brand that likes to market an NHTC product. So we're using all modern technology with the exception of a growth promoting implant. Again, the current premium, not quite $22 per hundredweight, and in reality, that's probably a break-even opportunity to cover the cost that is offset by the lowered efficiency of not using an implant. And the next one shown here, a USDA Prime premium. You'll notice 3 marbling scores there: abundant on the left, moderately abundant in the center, and then slightly abundant on the right. So not quite a $12 per hundredweight premium for USDA Prime. And if you follow the market news reports, you'll notice that there's a wide variation in this. I believe yesterday's report indicated that the low was 0 by one packer and as much as $25 by another. So significant variation in the premium offered to hit this program. Premium choice is another opportunity that many of our beef processors favor. And you'll notice $4.75 premium currently. That is most specifically for the certified Angus beef brand. You'll notice that there are many other brands that have been marketed over the years, most notably Sterling Silver, Chairman's Reserve, and Swift's 1855 product. All of those are built upon those carcasses grading modest, 0, or higher, predominantly what we call the upper 2/3 or premium choice programs. Yield grades 1 and 2 also get a subtle discount. You'll notice yield grade 1 is $3.79 per hundredweight, whereas the yield grade 2 is $1.86 per hundredweight. Not fantastic premiums, but they do help offset the cost of feeding these cattle. So to wrap this up, this slide really illustrates the value traits that we are observing and looking for in cattle. Notice that most of those traits are in red, which indicates they are a discount. Only 4 traits are in white, which indicates they're at par value. And then 7 traits in green, which indicates they're a premium. So one word of advice for everyone out there that are selling cattle on a value-based grid or formula system, the key is to minimize the discounts rather than trying to hit or target any premium outcomes. So with that, I think I'll wrap it up and take any questions that the audience may have.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lawrence, for that refresher there on beef grading. Remember to submit a question at any time. Just click on the chat box and type it there. We'll try to get to as many as we can in time we have. While we wait for some of your questions, Ty, I have a few for you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you talked about in the discounts about dairy compared to beef. What are your feelings now that we're seeing some trends in more of the dairy and beef composite cattle coming through the feedlots? What adjustments plants might need to consider if that trend continues to grow, or how do we grade those cattle?
So we won't need to consider any adjustments per se at the beef processor level as that market continues to grow. There's a lot of benefits to the dairy beef cross. First off, let me back up. We mentioned meat and meat to bone ratio in the dairy animal. However, the two big keys that were profound in the beef processor trying to eliminate that animal from their daily harvest was, one, they're too tall and or too long, depending on your perspective. And secondly, they had an outrageous rate of liver abscesses. So those were the primary reasons that the beef processor would prefer to minimize the slaughter of those animals if they're able to. The dairy beef cross is going to be able to minimize or alter the skeletal structure of that animal, and will be able to pull it back somewhat and be able to harvest that animal without altering the structure of most of the beef processors. So that's a definite improvement. However, the liver abscess rate is probably going to be very similar to what we see in the traditional calf-fed Holstein or calf-fed Jersey animal. And the issue is that animal is being treated the same, even though it's a half beef genetic animal. It's still being treated the same as the Holstein and or Jersey calf was being treated prior. And so we don't see the liver abscess rates changing very much at all. So we're still going to have to improve that outcome before those animals are widely accepted by the beef processor.
Okay. And then being this current situation that we're in with the pandemic and dating back to February, March when it all started, how much has yield grade 4s and 5s increased since COVID compared to like 2018 or 19?
So I don't have that exact data in front of me, but they definitely have increased. I'm going to shoot from the hip here and say that yield grade 4s have increased about 2%, and yield grade 5s have probably increased about 0.5%. We're definitely seeing heavier and fatter carcasses in the mix right now as compared to what we normally would, in part due to COVID.
Okay. And on that same note, maybe you could talk a little bit about, how we're handling cattle thus far through the pandemic, the backlog from March, April, May, what do you hear? Are we back to full steam, or are we still backed up?
So based on the current data that we have right now, we're not back to full steam. So full steam in our beef processing system is about 124,000 cattle harvested per day. That's about 81% fed steers and heifers, about 19% cull cows and bulls. And prior to the pandemic, we actually hit the 124 mark on 2 days. Since about April 1, there was a steep drop from April 1 to about the 1st of May. And the bottom of our slaughter got down to about 80,000 head per day. And then then we started to increase to back to about June 1. And from June 1 till now, I want to say we're relatively normal. We're able to slaughter 115 to 116,000 cattle a day. So in a positive light, we're able to slaughter that many cattle a day and keep the beef industry moving forward. I don't want to be pessimistic, but there's still room for 8,000 to 9,000 more animals to be slaughtered per day. So there is some room to improve slaughter capacity and help to take some of the glut away from the industry.
Okay. With our current situation that we're in, and we heard yesterday from some of our presenters, talking about the changing demand from less restaurants to more retail, home cooking. where are cuts going, and if there are any adjustments at the packer level to prepare for that. You know, like when you talked about the different beef grading systems, you know, with that trend, you know, do you have any insight on that?
So the bigger adjustments aren't made at the packer level per se. So the packer is still a core business in that they're going to take a live animal, convert it into a carcass, take the carcass, convert it into a boxed beef product. That largely hasn't changed, and I'm skeptical that at the 35 or so major beef processing facilities we have in this country right now, that's going to change much in the future. What I do see changing more is what happens to the box after it leaves that major facility. So I think we're going to see more intermediate processing steps where we take that boxed beef product and we reduce the portion size, we add flavors, we add spices, we add marinades, we continue to add value to the product, again, after it leaves the original processor, before it gets to the retailer or the food service provider. My opinion is we're going to see more intermediate processing pop up in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dr. Lawrence. Looks like we don't have any more questions for now, so we'll just keep on going. As our next speaker, Dustin Aherin, prepares to come on screen, we want to take a brief moment to recognize some of our sponsors for today's session.
Benoit Angus Ranch. We're located in Asn, Kansas. We have about 450 registered Angus cows, and we farm about 2,500 acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat, and some milo.
We've had Hydra beds at least for 30 years. Guess I seen videos of them and thought that would work for us, and we use them for you know, a lot of purposes.
We've got 3 of them, and you know, the pickups are the ones that break down probably more than the Hydra Bed. That's why we got the 3, so we can keep two going all the time, and then we have the spare if one of them does break down. But they're easy to run. You know, we got a hired hand that helps us, and it's easy for him to use too. All of us can run it. There's me, my brother, and my dad, and our hired hand, and you know, we use it pulling posts, moving feeders. You can move about anything with those arms. You can put it back and you know, put a chain around something. Mineral feeder. They're just really versatile that we can do different things with it besides the feeding of the hay.
You know, we've tried another brand, and I just like the simple design of it. They just work.
Hi, I'm Mark Kirk, Regional Sales Manager for Alta and Alta Seeds, and we're glad that you've joined us for High Plains Journal Cattle U. Alta and Alta are global leaders in sorghum productions, and we're going to bring you an extraordinary event called Sorghum Frontiers. Now, we call it Sorghum Frontiers because we believe that we are on the edge of the frontier for the sorghum industry. We're going to bring to you things like our Empire Forage lineup that brings together industry-leading traits into a lineup that fits all kinds of operations. You'll get to see iGrowth hybrids, our grain hybrids that are herbicide tolerant, the first to come to the market in the U.S. And if you kind of look behind me, I'll give you a little sneak peek of some of the things that you just might see at the Sorghum Frontiers Virtual Field Day on November the 5th, where you can learn more about how to take your forages to the next level.
Thanks to all these and all our sponsors for our virtual Cattle U. You'll be hearing from many more throughout the series of sessions this week. You can also read more about their products and services in the digital program that will be emailed to all registrants. Well, now let's bring on Dustin Aherin for his presentation, Cow Size and Profitability in Your Herd. Originally from Phillipsburg, Kansas, Dustin Aherin has been involved in several sectors of the beef industry, from seed stock and commercial cow-calf to cattle feeding. Aherin started as an animal protein analyst with Rabo AgriFinance in February 2020, upon completing a PhD from the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University. His graduate work focused on applying systems modeling to beef cattle production and included a visiting fellowship at MIT Systems Dynamics founding institution. Prior to completing graduate school, Dustin spent time in Russia on an AI ET project and worked for Elanco Animal Health as a Feedyard sales rep. Currently, Dustin also serves on the American Gelbvieh Association Board of Directors. Dustin, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, it's great to be with everyone this morning. A topic of conversation that I'm sure everybody in attendance has had is, what's the right cow size? What's too big? What's too small? What's the most profitable type of cow? And those conversations are had at the sale barn, at industry meetings, the coffee shop, and there's really no consensus in the industry as to what's too big, what's too small. And then we also kind of tend to throw in the milk production question into that conversation as well. So with no real consensus in the industry, what does the research have to say in terms of trying to form a consensus around what's the most economically efficient, profitable cow size? And really, there's not a broad consensus in the literature and the research either. Some studies have found that smaller cows that milk less are more profitable. Others have found that profitability increases with larger or heavier milking cows. And what a lot of this has to do with is the difference in economics at the time of the study. What were cattle prices? What were feed prices? As well as the resource conditions and specific environment those cows were maintained in. Were we talking about something in the eastern half of the United States, something in the Mountain West, or a more arid region? So there's definitely different things to consider. Another key point is that efficiency metrics really depend on what you're measuring against. Are you measuring efficiency on a per dollar basis, a per head basis, maybe a per acre basis? So those are all things to consider when looking at profitability and what really the goals of an operation might be. A key point is that biological efficiency and economic efficiency are not necessarily the same thing. Again, it depends a lot on the specific conditions that we're measuring these traits in. So it's important to measure them separately. Oftentimes they will align fairly well, but that's certainly not always the case. And there have been several studies and data sets that have shown that you can have different rankings of biological efficiency versus economic efficiency. At the same time, these are really key points that the beef industry needs to address, as the cow herd accounts for roughly 50% of beef production's total energy consumption. So we need to figure out how can we consume that energy efficiently, both from a biological standpoint, so pounds of calf weaned, number of calves weaned, things of that nature, as well as an economic efficiency standpoint. What's the cost of that energy? And I think a key point that we can say pretty broadly, even before really digging into the details, is that one size does not fit all. It's going to depend on the operation's goals. It's going to depend on the geography. It's going to depend on management practices, marketing strategies, you name it. So as part of my dissertation through my PhD at K-State, which was finished up earlier this year, we really took a deep dive into this question around biological and economic efficiency, and specifically looked at production within the Kansas Flint Hills and how different combinations of mature cow weight and peak lactation might influence these efficiency metrics. Another important aspect I want to highlight is that we looked at it from a long period of time. You know, most studies in the beef industry, it's difficult to get a lot of years in a study. We have a lot of generations in a study. We have a long generation interval, a long production cycle. So being able to look at this from an extended time frame is really something important. So why do a model instead of looking at doing a live animal study? One, it can really simplify some of the confounding factors and really hone in on what we're aiming to look at. It's less expensive. I think everybody here probably realizes that cattle aren't cheap to feed, aren't cheap to maintain or buy, and it's more time efficient. As I alluded to do a study that we do, a similar live animal study that we looked at would probably cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and take 18 years to do. We can also account for biological variation, some of that randomness. I think everybody's probably experienced that you can manage groups of cattle the exact same way and get different outcomes, whether that's across groups or across individuals. And modeling really helps kind of build a strategy and understanding before diving deep into implementing something in the real world. So just a brief synopsis of this model. It really works to combine genetic potential, growth impacts from a nutritional and puberty, reproductive standpoint, combined with health and management, nutrients and availability. Again, something that that I've kind of discussed already, but when that term means stochastic, that really means that it's a way to account for that biological variation. So instead of saying that this is the average, it allows us to account for some of the risk. What's the distribution of potential outcomes? What's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? And then being able to do it in a multi-year standpoint. I think everybody can recognize that when you're maintaining a cow herd, what you did last year is going to impact your production outcomes this year. And so being able to account for multi-year compounding structures is really valuable. And being able to do that on an individual basis also helps to account for that feedback structure and that biological variation. So what did we look at from a parameter standpoint, just to give you a taste of really how this was set up from a scenario standpoint? We looked at the Flint Hills specifically, accounting for precipitation, temperature, and using that to estimate forage production. And then we looked at 32 different breeding systems. So 8 different mature cow weights ranging from 1,000 pounds to 1,700 pounds in 100-pound increments, and then 4 different peak lactation potentials ranging from 15 to 30 pounds per day. The herd size we simulated was 100 head. To account for that biological variation, we simulated each scenario 100 times and then set up a breeding season of 63 days And a really key point in all of this is that in this simulation, we assumed that cows were managed to meet their nutritional needs. So really a lot of the efficiency metrics are accounted for on a cost basis. So if a cow requires more energy, it's not that she gets thin and doesn't breed back, it's that the dollars required to keep her in good condition would go up. And you could think about that at the inverse for little cows being cheaper to maintain, not necessarily having better or worse pregnancy rates. So what were some of the outcomes? To explain this graph a bit, each box is a different scenario. Each color of box represents a different mature cow size. And what we're looking at here is kilograms weaned per cow exposed. So the higher the number, the better on that efficiency metric. The black bar across the boxes represents the median, so the middle animal, the middle number in this distribution. The top of the box is the top 25% line. The bottom of the box is the bottom 75 or the bottom 25% line. So black bar is the middle, top is the best 25%, bottom of the box is the worst 25%. And then if you look across the bottom, we've looked at different lactation potentials as well. So to really sum up what this graph represents, kilograms weaned per cow exposed increased with mature cow size, which I think most would make sense if there's a correlation between growth and mature cow size. And then kilograms weaned per cow exposed increased with milk and lactation. Again, that probably makes sense. And like I said, because we're managing these from a meeting nutrition standpoint, there wasn't a big difference in these different cow sizes and lactation potentials from a pregnancy percentage standpoint. But what about the efficiency of those pounds weaned? So a similar way to look at this graph in terms of the boxes and the middle line, and in this case, a higher number is also better. So we're looking at the kilograms weaned per 100 mega cows of net energy requirements. So how many kilograms were weaned per unit of energy input into these different production systems? What this suggests is that the smaller cows were more efficient in converting energy into pounds of calf weaned, and added lactation was also more efficient in terms of energy input into pounds of calf weaned. So that's from a biological efficiency standpoint. And this study really aligned well with other studies that have been done in different resource environments. And when we look at it from a mature cow weight standpoint, it really suggests that there probably isn't enough added weaning weight associated with larger mature cows to offset the added nutrient requirements of those larger mature cows. From a peak lactation standpoint, it still varies a bit in terms of the scientific consensus. This study found that higher lactation cows were more efficient. Other studies have matched that finding, and a couple studies have had a different outcome. But again, I think it really depends on nutrient availability and how cows are managed. An underlying theme in this research is the importance of having a uniform cow herd and managing cattle on a uniform basis. If your cow herd's not uniform, Some cows are going to be getting too much nutrition. Some cows are going to be getting not enough. And that's really something that I think adds to some of the discrepancies in both the research outcomes and what we see, out in production. So let's look at it from an economic standpoint. Revenue in these scenarios was generated from both weaned calves and cull cows. And then expenses that were accounted for were, fed ration expenses, pasture rent, the cost of replacement females, and then interest costs, assuming 100% financing. Some of the things that we ignored were labor, fuel, utilities, facilities, production costs that are more specific to operation type rather than specific cow type. So we really concentrated our focus on the 65 to 70% of total expenses that can be associated with cow type. So if we look at economic efficiency in terms of annual return per breeding female, so dollars returned per cow that's exposed for breeding, again, obviously a higher number is going to be better. And you can interpret these plots the same way: small cows on the left, big cows on the right, and the median, or the middle number, is the black bar, and then the best 25% is the top of the box, the worst 25% is the bottom. And this data would suggest that as cow size decreases, return per breeding female tends to increase. And obviously there's some overlap, there's some variation. That's part of that biological risk, biological variation. And it also tends to increase with lactation, but that trend gets a little bit fuzzy as you get into some of the heavier weight cows. And that has to do with just the interaction between nutrient requirements and dollars returned, pounds weaned, things of that sort. But one thing I think is really interesting when you look at return on a per head basis is it really depends on the economic conditions that we're in. So looking at it on an individual year basis, the blue dots represent the price per kilogram of roughly a 500-pound weaned steer calf. The red dots represent feed costs. So you can see here that as the difference between cattle price and ration cost gets wider, the return actually tends to favor those big cows. So when feed is cheap and cattle prices are high, big cows are with a lot of growth and production potential are probably going to return you more on a per head basis. On the other hand, if you look at years like 2011, 2012, when feed prices are really high, which is really how we accounted for drought in this model, those big cows are going to lose you the most money. And we all remember 2014, 2015 with cattle prices the way they were. If you could get as many pounds as possible, you were going to be rewarded for that. Whereas the smaller cows tend to be a little bit more stable in terms of what that general return per animal is. This is looking at a similar metric, but breaking it down from a lactation standpoint. Again, when feed costs are cheap relative to cattle prices, you're rewarded by weaning off as many pounds as possible. So those heavy milking cows tend to be more profitable on a per head basis. When feed costs are high relative to cattle prices, that advantage really goes away. Again, compare 2011, 2012 versus 2014 and 2015. What if we look at this from an acre standpoint? So per grazing acre, what's the return? Again, a similar outcome when we look at the aggregate across all the years. The smaller cows tended to return more dollars per grazing acre, and we also tended to see an increase in return per head or return per grazing acre with added lactation. Again, those trends start to fade away a bit as you get into heavier cows. Perhaps the best metric to look at economic efficiency is return on investment. So dollar returned per dollar invested. And again, we tend to see an increase in ROI with smaller cows and more lactation potential. But one thing that this study and most every other study assume is that, one, these cow types really exist in reality. So, the question I would pose is how many 1,000 pound cows that have a peak lactation of 30 pounds per day actually exist in reality? If you go and look through beef cow research, you really can't find any reference to cows that are that small and milk that heavy. I think an example of that from a dairy perspective might be something like a Jersey. Those animals exist, but do they exist in the beef cow herd? There's really no evidence of that. Maybe they do in certain situations. Another important assumption that this baseline scenario and all other studies have assumed is that there's no calf price differentiation based on the projected performance after weaning. So in this study, we assumed all calves were sold at weaning. But if those animals have different projected performance, that is going to impact the price that you receive at weaning. Some studies that have really looked at the breakdown of different framed calves when they're sold at weaning suggest that there's about a $6 per hundredweight discount between a small framed calf and a medium framed calf based on standard USDA frame scoring. So we could probably assume that a lot of these 1,000 pound cows could end up with calves that might fall in that small frame category. Another way to look at it, and I just did this using market conditions for the last week of August. If we're going to buy an 800 pound steer that finishes at 1,230 pounds versus an 800 pound steer that would finish at 1,430 pounds, the break-even purchase price on that calf is about $9 per hundredweight less for the calf that's going to finish at 1,230 compared to the calf that's going to finish at 1,430. Again, in these breeding systems where we're mating a small mature weight genetic bull to a small mature weight genetic cow, it would probably be tough to get an animal with 1,000 pound genetics to finish it at 1,430. So again, definitely some reason to have some discrepancy in calf price. So what if we look at the top return on investment cow sizes and lactation potential combinations under the baseline scenario? Again, just like that chart showed, tends to favor smaller to moderate mature cow weights with pretty heavy lactation. But if we take away those baseline assumptions, assume that the super lightweight mature cows that milk really heavy don't exist, and then apply about a $6 per hundredweight discount to the remaining 1,000 pound mature weight animals, assuming that they're not going to finish at a heavy industry standard weight. That really changes the picture. And we start to see these moderate framed cows that have moderate to high milk kind of rise up to the top. So on these top 8 rankings, if you took the median of all the cows in these categories, you'd come up with about a 1,300 pound cow that milks 25 to 27 pounds per day. So really trying to think about this, from a practical standpoint, we're often taught in the beef industry to have a uniform cow herd, really feed and maintain your cows to have a body condition score between 4 and 6, and try to keep that pregnancy percentage above 90%, and manage your nutrients to match your environment, manage your cow type to match your environment. Other estimates of cow size have estimated it to be about 1,350 pounds. If we look at the CHAPS data from 2018, which is a commercial cow-calf database from North Dakota and covers a lot of the northern plains, their average mature cow size was about 1,390 pounds. Also, if we consider that most U.S. cow-calf producers operate in non-arid climates, we often think of the cowboys of the West being in the desert or the arid plains or the mountains, but in reality, you can draw a line from the eastern half of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, over to maybe Chicago, and there's a big percentage of the U.S. cow herd that's going to fall on the eastern side of that line. So if we follow these recommended practices and account for those differences in price received at weaning, it very well could be that the last 2 decades have really shown us that the most economically efficient cow weighs somewhere between that 1,200 to 1,400 pound range and has a peak lactation somewhere around 25 pounds per day. And if we just think about kind of the maxim that, everything in moderation is good, not getting too extreme one way or the other, I think that kind of makes sense. With that, I'll wrap it up and open it up for any questions.
Well, thank you, Dustin, for sharing those insights. I know that certainly got me thinking. Now, let's hear from you. Remember to submit a question at any time. Just click on the chat box and type it there. We'll try to get as many as we can. While we wait for your questions, here, Dustin, I've got a few for you. Okay,
Sure.
So what do you practice on your own herd? What are some of the triggering factors for you and your family and your decisions?
Right. So, again, I think it's trying to find that middle ground, getting cows that are too extreme and one way or the other, I think creates challenges. And then thinking about what's the end game? Are these animals going to be sold at weaning? Are they going to a feed yard? Primarily my experience in terms of the cattle that I own is on the seed stock side. So, we're really thinking about what types of genetics will make the, commercial cattlemen successful in the next generation from a replacement heifer standpoint or a bull standpoint. And the operations I've been involved with, we have really implemented feed efficiency technologies using some residual feed intake data to help get a better picture of what these efficiency metrics are on an individual basis.
Okay. There's one from the chat room. What was the predominant breed studied in the Flint Hills?
So that's a good question. In this model, we used the genetic trend of Angus cattle over the last 20 years. So, with that being the dominant breed in the U.S., that's what we used in this study.
Okay. Yesterday, we had some sustainability discussion. Have you thought about that sustainability factor of more uniform cow herds and making cull decisions based on cows' efficiency and raising pounds per calf versus her size?
So, absolutely. I think this is part of the sustainability discussion. A big factor that sometimes we tend to overlook from a sustainability standpoint is economic sustainability. You have to be in business to be in business sustainably. And so accounting for, these type of metrics is important. And it's not, I would not suggest going out and just culling cows based on size, but if you can breed for cows with a specific size or specific, genetics that match your environment, that's a transition that you can make over time. It could potentially get pretty costly to go out and just make a mass culling decision based on size and then have to replace all those animals.
Right. So basically, if we had a crystal ball and we knew in 2 to 3 years, cow prices were going to be high and feed costs were going to be low, we could all switch to giant cows. Or if it was going to be low cow prices and high feed prices, then we would moderate to all the small cows, correct?
Right. If we have that crystal ball, that'd be perfect. And
that's right.
And that's why we have to think about this over the long term. There's going to be variations where some years, some cows are probably better and some years other cows are better. But if we think about being in business over several decades, we need to think about which ones are going to work and be consistent.
Very good. Well, I think that wraps up our time for questions. Thanks again for joining us this morning. Thanks to our speakers, Dr. Ty Lawrence and Dustin Aherin. And thanks to our session sponsors, Alta Seeds. Join us again right here at noon when Dustin rejoins us to share a look at beef markets from a macro perspective from his work at Rabo AgriFinance. And we'll also have veterinarian Dr. Tara Rooney-Barnhart, a BQA trainer for Kansas, who will share how we can protect our social license to operate. You might want to bring some of your employees and family members to the screen to watch that session too. That session begins right here at the same link at noon. So grab your lunch and join us for some learning. If you like this format, or if there's something different we can do, let us know. All registered attendees will receive a survey in their email boxes. As you might imagine, we're reinventing our programming right now, and we could really use your feedback to make sure that we craft session topics and times that help you. Thanks for helping us make a better experience for you in the future. On behalf of all of us here at the High Plains Journal, thanks for writing with us. And we'll see you here at noon for our next session of High Plains Journal, Virtual Cattle U.
Dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. The headlights on both ends of my heat day. This country lies